All right, great. So we're here today for Beginner's Mind, Scaffolding, Reteaching, and Making a Lesson Plan. So we'll be taking a look at a few things in detail here, but I want to start us off, if you would not mind putting an introduction in the chat. We love to know who we have with us today. And so if you could share your name, and also if your name on the screen here is not what you would prefer to have it as, you would be willing to change that on Zoom as well. It's helpful for us. The organization and the population that you teach. And then we're going to add one more thing for you to share today, and we'll have an opportunity to look at some of those things in a bit. But just for fun, I want you to think about something that you are still a beginner at doing. And that could be something professional or something just kind of silly that comes to mind, something that you're actively working on as a skill, whatever it might be for you. But if you could share that in the chat along with your introduction, we'd love to know a little bit more about who you are. So while we're watching those chats come in, we'll do a short introduction here of ourselves. So I'm Amy, and pleased to be working with the Office of Children and Families this year to be providing these workshops. And I have about 10 years of experience in the adult ed realm, done a little bit of everything from curriculum development and ESL and high school equivalency and college courses for composition and other things of that nature. So I've really seen the gamut of different pieces of this work. Laura, if you would not mind, let me do my thing that I'm a beginner at. I'm still a beginner at parallel parking. I wish I wasn't. I've been driving for a long time. It feels like it should be different by now, but I've just come to accept that I'm gonna claim my beginner status on that, and that's something that I'm still learning. Laura, how about you?
Hey everyone, I'm Laura. I teach right now. I teach students at the College of New Jersey. I teach like freshmen. I teach students in all years. I teach grad classes, many future educators. I teach classes in creative writing, in literature, and in gender studies. And I'm parenting a toddler, so I'm in beginner's mind a lot right now.
That's a great comparison there. Yes. Laura, would you mind looking at the chat too? And is there anybody else who has told us something they're still a beginner at that you'd be willing to share?
Oh, yes, right. Absolutely. So we have with us a beginner at rock climbing,
Hmm.
a beginner at playing drums, a beginner at the Dari language, and working on my skills in gardening, a beginner at baking bread, a beginner at supervising. And that's what we've got so far, Amy.
That's fantastic. Well, feel free to continue to share those. If you just joined us, please put your introduction in the chat as well, your name, the organization and population you teach, and something you're still a beginner at doing. So thank you to all of you who have shared so far. We appreciate getting that chance to know a little bit more about who you are. So for today, this is the agenda that we're looking at. We have until about 11:30 together. We will have some time at the end for breakout discussion and a chance to talk with other peers if you're able to continue joining us for that portion as well. But we are going to start with a grounding moment. We're going to look at what is scaffolding and reteaching, what are those concepts and how do they work into our particular work. And then we're going to look at it from a mindfulness perspective and what is beginner's mind. We're going to take the end of our time together to look at practical strategies and scenarios as well. So we're going to start with a grounding moment, and Laura is going to lead us in that.
Great. I love this graphic here, Amy. So Amy has introduced me to this practice as we've been collaborating on these workshops together a little bit, and it's an invitation for something we can also do with our learners. We're often running from place to place, arriving somewhere stressed, and we all know it's hard to impossible to learn something new or really be present when we're stressed. So this is just an invitation to take a minute to arrive here today. We're often not in one moment because there's so many demands on our time. And so today, to ground, we're going to take a moment to honor the things that we've done and will do today, and then bring ourselves back to the present. This star in the middle here, to rest and be together. So to start, I invite you to rest your eyes on a comfortable spot. That could be on your screen or off the screen, or close them. Just taking a minute to notice, where does your gaze want to go? How far away from your center do you want to be looking right now? And just taking a moment to just soften your gaze. And then just to take in, where has your body taken you so far today? So you might take a moment to remember your morning routine, your commute if you had one, if you took a walk or sat outside, if you went to the gym, where you drank your coffee, and just take a few deep breaths with that in mind. And then take a moment to acknowledge where else your body will take you for the rest of today. Where might you be going next, and after that, and after that? Think about the plans that you have that are floating in your mind, and just give them a nod, a moment of acknowledgement. And at your own pace, in whatever way, take some breaths. And now that we've kind of acknowledged where we're coming from and where we're going, I invite you to take a moment to just determine with curiosity, where are you right now? Where is your body? What are your senses taking in of the space around you? Maybe other people, animals, street noises. What can you smell or taste? How does your seat feel? Can you notice the air around you? Anything you notice is okay, pleasant or unpleasant, or just wondering what's there. What do you see in your space? Can you feel the ground under your feet or the chair supporting you? What are the noises happening around you? Why did you decide to join today? Just taking some breaths with whatever you notice. Okay, I invite you to decide on just one thing that might help you be more present for the time that we're together. So make an intention. It can be small, it can be simple, like closing your email or flipping over your phone or making some tea to sip on. One thing that might help you join today. Taking screen breaks when you need to, your eyes, whatever it is, getting a little more comfortable in your chair. Then take some breaths and let us begin.
Thank you, Laura, for taking that moment with us. This is a reminder, as you are settling into your space and coming into here, that wherever you are, in whatever way you feel most comfortable participating today, is welcome. We encourage you to put thoughts and questions in the chat, and we'll have a chance to share those as we go along today. If you are in a space that you're sharing and other people or pets or kids may be walking by, they're all welcome on your screen as well. So thank you for being here, and we're excited to have this time with you. All right, so where is this, oh geez, there we go. Where is this workshop coming from today? So as the adage goes, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And as educators, that can be very frustrating for us. And so this workshop comes out of a place of trying to solve some of my own frustrations in the classroom. And I wonder if you have been in a similar place. I had the most perfect setup for this end of week project. I was working with a group of students where I met with them every day for 3-hour blocks in the mornings, 5 days a week. And I had thought, wow, we had this great theme going on. I'm going to put together this project. We're going to use vocabulary and skills from this week and also some things that we worked on a few weeks ago. We'll put it all together. They'll be able to do it all in groups in one time period, and then we'll present at the end and we'll leave for the weekend and everybody will be feeling great. But instead, as I got started with the project, questions started coming up, which I had not made any time for. And so I'm feeling rushed and frustrated about, oh, we already went over this. Don't you remember that was from a few weeks ago? We did this already, and you're just going to use some of that in here. And I'm realizing that my instructions are not as clear as I had thought they were. I ended up spending half of the class time reteaching material that I thought that we had already mastered and reviewing concepts that I had considered far behind the current level that we were in. And then the project ended up feeling really rushed, and none of the groups finished, and we did not have time to present. And we're all leaving for the weekend with this heightened stress. And now a new responsibility to figure out, do we take this project into next week or do we just scrap it and move on from here? So with all of that frustration and this great plan that looked perfect on paper, looked like a great way to use all these skills we had built up, what I had to realize is that I wasn't actually setting my learners up for success because I hadn't done all the work to make sure they were keeping the skills fresh that we were using to build up to such a lofty project. And I had put it in too tight of a time frame with the expectation that everybody could just jump in with all the skills needed in that exact moment. I had taught this course multiple times, and this was a new idea that I was really excited about incorporating. But what I had forgotten is that I see this material over and over, and I scour over it and prepare it. And so to me, this is old stuff. This is stuff that we just know, we're ready. To them, it was all part of the new learning that we were doing together, and they weren't quite ready for what I had set up. So today, what I want to think about is the ways that we can approach scaffolding and reteaching in our lesson plans and how we might be able to use some old mindfulness techniques to be able to do that in a really thoughtful and meaningful way. So when we're looking at scaffolding and reteaching, I want to think about them in terms of the tools that we need to build a nice, strong ladder for what we're teaching our students to achieve and helping them to get to. So scaffolding, according to the University of San Diego, they call it a classroom teaching technique in which instructors deliver lessons in distinct segments, providing less and less support as students master new concepts or material. So scaffolding can be both short-term things that we do for a lesson just for today, but it also has to be long-term, the things that we're putting together over the course of our course semester, whatever the time we have with the learners. The reteaching is just teaching again, and it's part of that scaffolding process. Because without the review and the repetition, we lose the strength of a learned concept, and we just can't build on it as well. So we need both these things together to be able to have a nice, strong foundation to move forward. Now, what happens if we are missing some of it? So if we're missing scaffolding in our lesson plans, it's like cutting off the bottom rungs of the ladder and telling students we're just going to jump up to the top today. Automatically, we are not going to have all the supports that we need to be able to get up there. And so some students may be able to make that jump and grab on. Others are not, and they're going to be stuck at the bottom for a while. So we need those scaffolding pieces to make sure everybody has the same opportunities to get up. If we're trying to teach without reteaching in that process, that's like climbing that ladder, but we've got some loose or broken rungs at the bottom. We need that repetition again to be able to really understand and remember concepts over time. As educators, part of our work is, again, not just throwing material out and hoping it sticks, but really finding ways that it can be meaningful in the course of a person's learning and life, especially as we're working with adults. For adult learners, the stuff that they are learning is crucial to, could be different skills in everyday life. It could be skills in their workplace and their ability to continue moving up there. And there's so many things that they are going to continue building on. So we need to make sure there's really strong bottom rungs with our reteaching and repetition. So with those concepts in mind, now we need to think about where they connect in the scheme of mindfulness. So if mindfulness is a new concept to you, welcome. We're so glad that you are here. Perhaps some of you have some experience with it or have a general knowledge of it. It's certainly become more of a buzzword in the past years. One definition of it is a moment-to-moment awareness of one's experience without judgment. So that's mindfulness as a whole. You're really just paying attention to what is happening. What is your experience? And not saying, oh, I'm noticing that I'm slouching today. That's bad. I got to sit up straight. It's saying, no, I'm slouching today. Maybe I can make a change. I think that I might feel more comfortable if I sat differently in my chair, and being open to what might come up, but without putting a specific judgment of good or bad on something like that. So today I want to look at mindfulness as a tool to explore how we build our lessons and lesson plans, and especially to help us see how we can better structure opportunities for scaffolding and reteaching. And we're going to look at one particular strategy, which is beginner's mind. So if beginner's mind may be a new concept for you, which is perfect because that's the idea behind it. We are constantly looking at the world as something new and trying to experience it as something new. So the quote here at the top says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few. And so part of using this tactic of beginner's mind is opening us up to what are all the possibilities that exist and how we can broaden our perspective on that. And this is a skill that we can practice. So I want to tell a story about beginner's mind to help illustrate it. This is a story I've heard in many different tellings, but this particular telling was written down by Gene Crawford. So the story goes that once a long time ago, there was a wise Zen master, and people from far and near would seek his counsel and ask for his wisdom. Many would come and ask him to teach them and enlighten them in the way of Zen, and he seldom turned anyone away. So one day, a very important person comes, and this person is used to command and obedience and came to visit the master and says, I've come today to ask you to teach me about Zen. Open my mind to enlightenment. And the tone of the important person's voice was one used to getting their own way. And so the Zen master smiled and said they should discuss the matter over a cup of tea. And when the tea was served, the master began to pour into the visitor's cup. And he poured and he poured and poured, and the tea starts to rise over the top of the cup and spill out all over the table and all over the clothes of this person who's come to learn. And so the person coming says, that's enough. You're spilling the tea all over. Can't you see that my cup is full? And so the master stops pouring and smiles and says, you're like this teacup. You're so full that nothing can be added. Come back to me when the cup is empty, and come back to me with an empty mind. And so that's the one of the origin type stories around beginner's mind, to think about how our cups can be too full to receive anything else. And in really learning and really being open to learning and being open to what new things might come, we have to find a way to take a step back and empty our cups. So especially as educators, and especially if you've been teaching in the same realm or the same class for a while, it can be easy to have a full cup and say, this is what we always do. This is what we know. This is what I'm going to take with me into my planning for today. And so many of those skills are important. But in order to really reflect on it and find ways to scaffold and meet our students where they might be, beginner's mind can help us to take that step back and see it differently. Okay, so when you're an educator and an expert, and if you've been with Laura and I before in workshops, we talk about the many hats that you might wear as an educator. And oftentimes, in a positive way, you're an expert in your field. You've learned so much about what it means to teach the subject matter. You're really invested in it. But sometimes the expert hat can get in the way of us doing things from a different perspective. And so when we're thinking about ourselves as experts in our field, I also want to think about how we can use that knowledge in a positive way. And so we want to take a step back from that and think about some key things when we're thinking about scaffolding and reteaching. So 3 of the questions that come to mind just as a baseline here, and we'll look at some more examples in detail, are what are my students asking and what are they not asking? So sometimes this comes from thinking about an activity that you are working on. And maybe you thought it was very clear what needed to be done, but all of a sudden students are asking questions about something that you thought was already good, like that you thought they would understand. So perhaps considering the questions that are being asked and saying that's where I need to take a step back and do some scaffolding around that and do some reteaching around that process. The things they're not asking, oftentimes this comes up when you have given an assignment and you thought that perhaps it was clear, and then you're realizing you're getting very varied results back. And it was maybe not as clear as you had thought, or not as precise as you had thought. And so thinking about, if it appeared clear to students, but in all different ways, what are the questions that aren't being asked, and how could you kind of go back and reframe those in your scaffolding there? Laura, I see that there are things happening in the chat. Is there anything that we need to address?
No, Katie just wrote a comment. It's such a great reminder. I love shifting the perspective, coming into class with an empty mind. Understanding where the learner is coming from is one of the best ways to teach in an effective and empathetic way. And yeah, absolutely. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Katie. That's, we appreciate any thoughts and comments along the way, and we will share them out. Laura can read them out from the chat, just because both accessibility and for folks who might be joining us for the recording after this. So thank you so much. Okay, so that's our first question to think about. The second question is, where are my learners repeatedly becoming confused or struggling on some sort of assessment? So whether it's a smaller scale assessment, just kind of checking in with students throughout the course, or whether it's something, if you have midterms or other types of tests and assessments going on, that you're seeing this is just a point where folks continue to struggle. And especially if it's multiple people throughout the course, that can be a place to stop and look. And the third one here is, which previous concepts are essential to making this lesson successful? So oftentimes we have lessons in a curriculum that do build on one another, but the scaffolding is often not built into the curriculum itself. And so it is our responsibility to look back and say, if we're studying this concept this week, what's something that we did up to now that's allowing the learners to do this, and how can we build in a review of that in order to make sure that they're ready for what we're doing this week, and to make that the strongest possible place. So. All right, so a question that comes both to my mind and to people that I talk with is, isn't this time consuming, right? I already have a lot on my plate. As educators, there's so much to do in building the lesson plans and getting things ready and communicating with students and putting in grades and making sure that people are ready to move up to the next level, whatever it is that's involved with your work. And so oftentimes it's a nice idea to incorporate some of these things that you might learn in a professional development workshop. And you're thinking, yeah, if I had more time, I'd do something like that. When I first learned about mindfulness, my friend Julie was teaching me a lot about it. And I was feeling very flustered because I kept leaving my house and forgetting things, forget my badge for work and all this. And I'm feeling like I'm already short on time and I'm so stressed and there's just so much going on. And she took a deep breath and said, what would happen if before you left in the morning, you stopped to take a breath and just made sure that you had all the things that you needed, your badge, your keys, your phone, your bag, before you left? What do you think would happen? So like, I really am like running in the morning. Like, I don't think I have time to do that. So I just want you to try it. And what I discovered was that I actually ended up saving more time by taking a moment to be present. Because instead of making 3 trips out to my car to run back to get the bag and run back to get this, and oh, I forgot that, and I left the coffee on the counter, all of a sudden I was just doing one stop for inventory that took me a few seconds or a minute, grabbed it all and went on my way. And of course, it's not foolproof. There are days that are more challenging than others. But ultimately, I found that it was not as time consuming as it felt in that moment of stress. And so mindfulness is a tool that really has so many benefits. And in addition to helping you to kind of save the time in the long run by being present now, we know that it boosts your working memory, it reduces stress, it improves focus, it decreases your emotional reactivity, and it gives you a little bit more cognitive flexibility rather than being stuck in the stress cycles where things feel more rigid. And so those are all just bonuses to using some of these strategies when you're looking at your lesson planning. So if that is a concern that has come up for you, take from experience that it's worthwhile to give it a try and see how it actually comes out. Now, in the scheme of lesson planning, right, we're going to look at some ways to incorporate this practically next. But we're thinking about adding in really just a minute or two of extra mindfulness time at the beginning, so that when you're in the middle of this lesson plan that you thought was like perfectly put together, the project at the end of the week, that you're not frustrated in that moment trying to repair and figure out how to fix it, that you have more time at the beginning to think about that scaffolding and reteaching so that everything is in place and you're ready to carry out the plan that you put together. Okay, so we're thinking about how do we actually incorporate this? What does mindfulness look like in a really practical way? Now, many of you, I'm sure, have some different practices or ideas. And so I'm going to invite you also that if you have something that comes up during this time, as you're looking at these examples, that you do or have done that's a helpful mindfulness practice in your classroom or in your preparation and teaching, please add that to the chat so that we can enjoy seeing those as well. So the first thing I'm going to encourage you to think about when it comes to mindfulness is that you have to have space for it. And it's both for you as the educator, as the preparer of the materials, and for your learners. So we're going to look at some different ways that can manifest. The reality is that when we're learning, it's a really creative process, and it takes a lot of our brain's energy and space. And so we really need room to grow and flourish in that creativity. So for educators, one of the things that you can do today, right, if you're thinking about plans for next week or whatever you might be working on right now, is you can use a quiet reflection before planning to open the space up in your mind. This could really be set a timer on your phone for 1 minute. And for that minute, you're just going to find a comfortable spot and breathe. Just taking a moment to breathe is going to open up a little bit of space in your life. It's going to take you out of the space of, okay, we got to get things done. We got to quickly organize all of that, and into a space where your brain can relax and open up. So that simple practice, right, adding 1 minute to the beginning, is going to give you a lot more space for creativity there. You could always think about the mindfulness of setting an intention about how you want to design your plan. I think when I go into lesson planning without a clear intention, oftentimes my default is to say, how do I put all of this into this lesson plan for next week, no matter if it fits or not? Right. If I set an intention, I can say, you know what, the primary goal is to make sure my learners have a lot of opportunities to talk to each other next week and practice the skill that we're working on. There we go. Right now I'm refocusing my entire lesson plan into thinking about focusing on that goal. And that's going to bring a different mindfulness perspective to how I plan and how much material I want to put in there and which material is most important. You can visualize how you think a lesson will go. Often this is one that I look at and I think, oh, that might take a lot of time. But really, when you start to think about it, right, you kind of have an idea of who your learners are, especially if you've gotten to know them a bit. You know the kinds of questions they like to bring up or comments they might make, the dynamics in the class. And so when you start to think about the lesson, right, you might know who the person is that's going to go, oh, we're talking about grammar again, right? And how you might address them. you might start to realize that there are some people who really struggle with this particular math concept. And so that is going to come up for them. And so you want to be ready to address that. And your own questions might come up. Maybe you're going through the lesson for the week and you realize there's a word in there or a vocabulary that you're going to be using that you don't know that well. And so you want to stop and reevaluate that so you don't get stuck in the moment. You're like, I don't know that word or how I want to use that. And so this is just an opportunity for you to put yourself in a different seat in your classroom, right? When you're visualizing, you can kind of see yourself, your students, you become an observer of what you think might happen and allow those questions and perspectives to come up. It's just one of the ways we empty out that cup and let it be filled in a new way. Something so important is to remember what it is like to be a learner. This is really important in terms of what we schedule in to our lesson plans, and how much we do during a particular lesson. I think it can be really overwhelming from a learner's perspective when there's so much packed into something and not enough space to be able to really reflect on it. So remember what it's like when you're learning something new. I know so many of you said what you're beginners at, and I think as educators, it is extra important to have something that you're a beginner at so you can remember what it's like to have that challenge, that frustration of trying to learn something new, trying to engage with it, and really having to wrestle with that more. So the more that we can keep ourselves in the perspective what it's like to be a learner when we're creating our lessons and putting things together, the more we can respond to that. We need to make sure there are spaces for learners to ask questions and review the material throughout. And a really important way to do this that's good for all of us is to take a brain break. So if you may have joined us for a previous session, if you have been with me and Laura before, we did a session on brain breaks and regulation techniques. So one of my favorite brain breaks, there are many ways to do it, but one of my favorites is to just have everyone stop and take whatever they're writing on. It could just be a sticky note, it could be paper, it could be a corner of their worksheet or whatever they have in front of them. If you're virtual, tell them to get something out and just ask them to do a little spiral on their paper, right? As tight as they can, starting in the center of the paper. This does not take any artistic skills. Everybody could participate in some way. But asking them to do that, give them a minute on the clock, right? There's no instruction during this time. You're not talking them through it, but it just gives them kind of a mindless activity to do to allow information to settle in and to get a moment where they don't have to be taking everything in. They're allowed to just kind of shut their brains down. And having those opportunities to take a break throughout the lesson is a good opportunity for them to come up with questions that might appear in their minds, to stop and ask for help on something that's not working for them, whatever it might be, right? It just creates some space. So it could be a wiggle break, it could be a bio break, it could be the drawing. It's a lot of ways to stop and take a break. Laura, I've seen some chats coming in. Is there anything we should take a look at?
I shared that, Amy, I love these ideas. I shared about, like for me, a really simple practice that doesn't take any time is I try to come back to the feeling of the ground beneath my feet. It could be like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, at the beginning of teaching, even if I'm running late, especially, right? And then in those moments of transition or something comes up, I feel flustered. Maybe someone has a lot of confusion I wasn't expecting. I try to come back to that. That just helps me. And then, yeah, I really loved your idea of setting intentions. And I just think for myself personally, a side benefit of that is like when I remember to set an intention for my teaching, it helps me notice what went well. Because as an instructor, I'm often focused on everything or like, where do we need to troubleshoot or go next? But if I come back to that intention, like, okay, we got to this one thing today, like the students started talking to each other and listening to each other. And that's what I was going for in class too. It helps me to just celebrate that.
That's a great perspective.
And then we have a couple more here. I take a deep breath, a deep breathing break during class to get the class moving and reset their and my bodies. Yeah, that's really good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate those thoughts. All right, just one more on this list. I want to think about how you can invite your students to be mindful. I love the idea of taking the breathing break together, right? That's a perfect example. But being mindful and present, and both in the classroom and in assignments that are given for outside the classroom, any homework or other things they might be working on. Um, I love just in the classroom, right, is making sure that folks have space to brainstorm. So in addition to the brain breaks, which would be separate from this, right? Brain breaks are not requiring you to engage with any of the material, just a chance for you to kind of move your brain to a different space and be able to come back. I think having space to do things like brainstorm, both individually and with small groups, with no pressure to put anything together right in that moment, just to think, just to imagine, right, is going to build up so much of that creative space and take pressure off. And so that's a great way to encourage students to be mindful, to open themselves up to new ideas without the pressures that can exist with, you have to have this done by end of class today. So just making space for that, creating spaces to brainstorm, and especially like the example I gave at the beginning with this, big project at the end of the week. That's a great way to say, at the end of this week, we're going to be putting together this project. And each day, we're going to stop and think about some themes from today that we might include in this project at the end of the week. So that way, when they get to it, they have spent time thinking about it. They're excited about it. They've come up with ideas. They've partnered with other people, and they're ready for that. So that's a simple way to build mindfulness there. One of the most memorable assignments that I had when I was in grad school, I had a professor who, for the opening assignment, said that our first step was to go make ourselves a cup of tea or coffee and sit down and really ponder the questions before we wrote anything. And I thought, I have never seen that in instructions before, where the professor specifically told me to stop and really take a moment back, like do something slow, right? You have to sip the tea or sip the coffee when it is hot. And so that was like an opportunity for me to rethink how I approached assignments. Instead of saying, okay, I've got this assignment, got to get it done, just going to go one question at a time. No, let me stop, let me sip my tea and do that. And so those little invitations can be a way just to open up your students to possibilities to be able to approach these assignments a little bit differently. So those are some of the ways that you can leave space to build mindfulness in yourself and your learners. So when I'm thinking about questions that help me to build on this skill of beginner's mind and mindfulness in the classroom, I always want to be able to infuse some creativity. And so part of that is having some questions that I can ask, or some starters to questions that I can ask. Sometimes when I'm feeling stuck, just letting myself sit with the starter of a question or a particular question can help me to really explore. So the first one is just, I wonder. And you might look at that and go, well, like what do I add to that, right? But oftentimes, if I think about a concept, say I'm teaching on a particular theme one week, and I stop and I just say, I wonder, and I give myself a minute to think about it, questions will start to come up. Right? I wonder about where the name for this concept came from. I wonder about this person or this author, or I wonder why the curriculum chose this particular reading for this week, right? Whatever it might be, right? You're coming up with just an opportunity to ask questions about what's in front of you, rather than just taking it and putting it back on paper for a lesson plan. So it gives you an opportunity to really critically look through that. What do these words mean? So when especially if you are teaching literacy or language at any level, that can be a really important skill. But anything that you are teaching, oftentimes certain jargon gets thrown around and you get used to it as an educator. But we want to clarify what some of these words mean so that you can help better explain them to your students and bring them to a level where everyone can jump on board and understand. Can I review this before we take the next step? So when we're thinking about scaffolding, like I had said earlier in the presentation, it's both a short-term and a long-term thing. And so we want to think about what are the concepts that got us to here that we want to review before we move on. But it's also important to think, is there something that we just worked on that we can do one more review of before we move on to the next step in this process. And that's the short term, whether it be within a lesson or just day to day, one day apart, that helps you to keep up those skills and keep that review regular. What do I need to know before I can do this? So again, going back to that idea of the more long-term scaffolding, what are the concepts that got me here? And then I think perhaps one of the most important questions, coming back to this idea of leaving space, when might I need a break during all of this? Having a break scheduled into your lesson plan is really important for you, and it's really important for your learners, both because we all just need breaks in general, but it also helps to open up that space for everyone. So think about that toward the beginning, thinking about it as part of your lesson planning, rather than something that gets rushed into in the middle of a lesson. So carrying some of those ideas, I want to take a minute to consider some specific scenarios for mindfulness and lesson planning. So we're going to look at 3 different areas. Perhaps they're areas where you teach, and perhaps they're not. But we're going to think about how to approach them mindfully. I would encourage you, if you'd like to do this more interactively, this is fully optional, but if you'd like to participate a bit more in this and get a chance to really practice this skill, just pull out a piece of paper or something where you can write down some thoughts that come up, because we're going to explore some questions and take a moment to think about how mindfulness and beginner's mind might come up for these different lessons. Even if these aren't your current area of teaching, I still invite you to think about them and challenge you to kind of contribute in whatever way that you feel you can. Because after all, what a wonderful way to implement beginner's mind by thinking about teaching something new or different. It's a great way to challenge yourself there. So we'll look at an example today with numeracy, literacy, and digital skills, all from the perspective of adult education. All right, so our first one, numeracy, is bringing mindfulness to teaching fractions. So if we have any high school equivalency folks out there, and you're not get a chance to look through everybody's who you teach, but if you are in that realm or another realm where you are teaching numeracy, fractions can be quite a bear to teach in this particular setting. They are something that came up often for me when I was working with the GED program, and I often found that it was a great frustration to learners to be tackling fractions, and also sometimes felt like this distant concept that didn't actually affect everyday life, right? And so that became the challenge to me to think about this a little bit differently, and not just carry my current knowledge, but bring something new. So your lesson today is with a high school equivalency class about multiplying and dividing fractions as part of their preparation for the math portion of the test. So if any of you out there are thinking, I don't even remember how to multiply or divide fractions, that's also where I was when I started teaching this lesson. Thought, whoa, I've got some beginner's mind to come in with already. I feel like my cup is empty. Starting. But over time, as you get kind of refreshing, it can be easy to forget some of the things that come with fractions. So here's what I'm going to invite you to do. Again, if you have a piece of paper, we're going to look at some questions, and you could even just jot down some thoughts that come up in this process. Feel free to share any thoughts as well in the chat or any ideas that you have. So I'm going to invite you to take a moment to take a breath in. And we're going to think about some of the following things. So with beginner's mind, you can make open space. You could think about some of the questions we've talked about so far. But here are some of the questions that came up for me as I was, pursuing this with beginner's mind. So the first thing I had to ask myself is, what skills have my learners most likely already mastered to get to this lesson? And I asked myself this because I know that I always walk into a lesson with assumptions, and it's better to know what those assumptions are and have a chance to challenge them before we get into the lesson. So I want to think about what I think they already know, right? What hopefully have they already learned? What do I think they've already learned? What do I imagine they've already learned? And getting that on the table, because it's helpful, again, to be able to review some of that. And invite learners into that review process. We're going to be talking about fractions today, but first we need to think about and give some of these other things that have led up to it. So what are the skills that I might assume that they've already mastered? Right, another question to consider, what information or vocabulary or skills could be helpful to review here? Um, if it's been a while since you've heard the words numerator and denominator, those are good words to review, right? They might come with some familiarity, but it's helpful to go back and think about, what are those words? How do I remember which one is which? What was it like learning this? When was the last time these learners worked with fractions? Have they already been doing lessons on fractions? Is this something that you've been working on yesterday? Is this something that you reviewed weeks ago? Are they all at different places with it and learning at their different speeds? Have some of them not touched fractions since 20 years ago? I'm not sure. So just kind of getting in your mind, when's the last time they interact with fractions, and how might that impact your structure? What else might you need to add or change by that? Another question I like to ask, especially with adult learners, is, why does the skill matter? Is there any practical application for why I might need to use this? This can be really challenging, but this is so important for adult learners to think about, because whatever they're learning, right, they have many other demands on their life, and it's important for them to know, where can I put this information? Why does it matter to my life? Why should I care about it? And how might it feel to be learning something new like this as an adult? So this could, again, be a new concept for some. This could be review for others. They might be coming at it from different places. But what does it feel like as an adult to learn something like this? And just kind of take a moment for the empathetic side of that settle in. What emotions might come up? So all in all, we took a couple of minutes, right? Considered some questions. These are just questions that came to my mind. Maybe other questions are coming up to you as you're taking a little bit of space to write and think. But we're looking at a few extra minutes to reconsider what the lesson might look like. And ideally with that, you're able to kind of take a new perspective on it, build in some of those things that you see need some extra support, some scaffolding, some reteaching, some review, and ultimately make it a more successful lesson. So that is our first one with numeracy. Laura, was anything in the chat? I didn't get a chance to see if anything changed there.
Nothing right now, Amy.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, if there's anything that comes up for you during these from your experiences, we'd love to hear what questions or ideas come up as well. All right, so if you're not teaching numeracy, perhaps you are teaching some form of literacy. So we're going to take a look at it from the idioms perspective. If we have some English for speakers of other languages, educators out there, you will know the concept of idioms very well from those courses. So for anybody who is unfamiliar, an idiom is those groups of words that have a meaning, but it's not deducible from the actual words there. So somebody says, oh, it's raining cats and dogs. Very difficult if you're learning a second language to understand what we mean by raining cats and dogs, right? Or I see the light, right? These kinds of things are in every language, but they can be very confusing and frustrating to learn. So how do we bring some mindfulness to teaching idioms? So we're going to say that for today, that's your lesson. You have an ESOL intermediate level course, and you are working on some idioms today. So I'll invite you again to take a moment to take a breath in, and then let's think about some of the following things. What makes learning an idiom difficult, and what might make them confusing? And this is a notoriously challenging concept. And so what is it about it that makes it difficult? Try to take a moment to think about what could be the frustration here. You're learning a language, you think you've got the vocabulary down, you think you've got the syntax down, and then somebody throws raining cats and dogs at you. That can be very frustrating. What has it been like for me to learn an idiom in another language? So for any of you who have learned another language, at any point in your life, when you hear or learn an idiom, what has that experience been like? I have made many mistakes in that realm of misinterpreting someone or misusing an idiom in my second language. So that can be part of the experience to consider. What do my learners already know that could help them with this? And how can I invite their knowledge and expertise? I think that's important to bring in at all levels of teaching, but especially when we have adult learners. How do we make sure that we invite them in to really share what they do know, what their experience is? Could be something from their first language that they bring to share with the class, just to kind of bring some levity to the lesson. What are some ways that we can incorporate that? And what would be helpful to reteach or help explain? Do we need to redefine idiom? Do we need to rethink? Do we need to, perhaps pair idioms together that have similar sentiments or similar vocabulary to see if there are, ways that they connect, so we can find some common threads? What would be helpful there? And then lastly, how is this helpful in real life? Always the important question, right? How are we actually going to be able to use this? Where might they see this in context? Are there opportunities to build into your lesson plan where they can use this in realistic ways? So there's our mindfulness from teaching idioms. We're going to look at one final example. I know we've had folks from previous workshops that have joined us that teach digital skills courses, and so we want to incorporate that. Even if you are not teaching digital skills, oftentimes that becomes part of the teaching process anyway, because we all have to, help students if they're using different digital components. So I think we can all use this in some capacity, but bring some mindfulness to teaching email. So the perspective is that you have a lesson with a beginner digital skills course to teach how to use email. Let's take a look at our questions. We'll take a breath in. Let's think about, why might your learners be here to learn this lesson? What do you think some of the motivations might be? What have you heard from learners? Is there an intake where you could gather information? What have you experienced if you've had previous courses and the learners that have been there? Just get an idea of the why behind this. What vocabulary is specific to email that the learners might not yet know? So for many of us, might use email every day, multiple times a day. But if folks are not familiar with email, then there is certain lingo that goes with it that might not be familiar to them. Is there anything that comes up that you think might be helpful for them to know, right? Looking at vocabulary lists. What would it be like to open an email if I had never seen it before? This is really taking yourself back to the beginning. What would that process look like? How familiar or unfamiliar, overwhelming, underwhelming? What might that look like for you if you had never seen email before this? What assumptions am I making about these learners? So again, thinking about what are you bringing to this that you think they might know or not know, what their experience might be or not be, and kind of just getting those assumptions out so that you can look at them more critically and say, are these true? Are they things that I'm still wondering about? Are there things that I might open my mind to saying, oh, maybe those aren't true? What else might be true about the learners? What could I invite them to teach me about in this? So there are 3 examples. I hope those are helpful ways to think about whatever it is that you might teach and some questions that you might ask yourself in that process. Laura, is there anything in the chat?
Yes, Amy, there's a couple comments here. There's one comment from this digital skills proposal, some vocabulary that might be helpful to be reviewed because it's specific, which is click on.
Ooh,
yeah, absolutely.
yes.
It'd be hard to do any instruction without knowing what that means, right?
Yes.
And then there's another comment from your last example about idioms, teaching idioms, and the suggestion is here to find idioms that match the lesson. For example, if you're teaching body parts, use body part idioms. Really
Yes,
like that.
great.
I like how much that's like integrating. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, they're not just a separate identity. Oh, that's great. Thank you all so much. All right. So I have one last thing before we take some time to talk to one another and join in breakout rooms. And so the last piece here is thinking about how do we really infuse creativity in throughout this process of scaffolding and reteaching. Obviously, using mindfulness, we're opening ourselves up to some more possibilities. We're opening ourselves up to different ways of viewing. But the reality is that sometimes we say, okay, I see that I need to review this. I see that I might need to reteach this portion. But I'm getting tired of just doing the same thing over and over, right? I don't want to get another worksheet that has this or whatever that might look like. And so I wanted to offer some ways to think about how creativity may look in the scaffolding process. I don't think it has to be drudgery. I think one thing to think about is that every class, you always start with something that begins on the ground floor. You're not going to ask people to jump up to the third floor. You're going to start on the ground floor. And what I mean by that is that you want to have an opening activity that everybody can join in on, whether they were here yesterday or they missed class for 2 weeks, or they are familiar with the lesson or they're unfamiliar with the lesson. Whatever it is, we want to be able to do like something that everybody can participate in. Some things that we've talked about in the past with Laura and I is having some sort of like a circle time at the beginning where folks get a chance to share something about what's going on, whether it's in their lives or it could be a silly question, it could be a serious question, but just an opportunity for everyone to get their voice in the room. Having an opening time, if you have perhaps a more reflective class or you're doing a writing class, having a short writing prompt for people to be able to share and then share with a partner, right? And be able to talk about it. But something related to either building community there or something related to the lesson that everyone could jump in on at the beginning. This is a great way to start with a level of engagement. And also a reason that I like to use it is when everybody gets their voice into the room at the beginning of the class, you can start to see when voices fade out and when people might be getting lost or frustrated or are thinking about other things during the lesson. And so it just helps me to gauge like, oh, this person shared a lot or was laughing at our opening activity, but I see they're kind of starting to shrink back now. I wonder if there's something we could address there. So it's another way to take the temperature on the class. So starting on the ground floor is important. Flipping the script is another great way to be creative about your scaffolding and reteaching. So flipping the script is putting your learners in charge of the teaching, each other, and remembering the material. And so really checking in on what the learners remember. A really simple way to do that, say, in order to do what we're doing today, we're going to need 4 concepts, right? Today, we're going to start putting together a full essay, but I need to remember what all the parts of an essay might be, or whatever that might look like for you. So you can have students, take the concepts, divide them up into groups, and write down a few things of what they remember about them and have a conversation about that. Let other people join in. I've seen where you do this with Post-its around the room. Get those giant Post-its, put them up on the wall. Here are the 4 things that we need to talk about. Can you go and write something on each paper of what you remember about it? And then we have a chance to review each of those. So that's a great opportunity to let the learners put their knowledge out there, share what they know about it. And it also, again, gives you a temperature on the room to know where folks are with the different concepts. And you can supplement with what might need to be added in there. So the next one is thinking about real life examples to make things actually tangible. So if we go back to what we were thinking about with teaching multiplying and dividing fractions, fractions can be terribly confusing to look at until you get something more practical to think about. And so I like to always use something like measuring cups, right? To say, what's a practical way that we see these in our everyday lives? So I will often say, last week we talked about multiplying fractions, and we use the example of doubling a recipe. So for example, 1/4 cup multiplied by 2 is 2/4 cups or half a cup. And we kind of show the examples of that. Now it's confusing because the 2 in half is actually smaller than the number 4 in a quarter. But in fraction world, it's a bigger fraction of that, right? So acknowledging the confusion that might be in the room, the things that can be frustrating, and then flipping it and saying, I wonder what's going to happen then if we are doing the opposite. If we're dividing fractions, what's going to happen to that bottom number? And what will that look like? And inviting their curiosity into that, right? What happens when we do the opposite? And so just building up that baseline for it. So those are some of the examples that have come to me. I would love if there's anything that comes to mind for you that has been a way that you use creativity in your scaffolding and reteaching. We will have an opportunity to share in brainstorm groups, and you're also welcome to share in the chat. Okay. So I'm going to pull up some questions here for our brainstorm groups. And Laura, if you would not mind putting that link in the chat, thank you. We have a doc so you can look at those up close and see. But we're going to take a chance to divide up into groups and have some moments to share with one another about what you're thinking about today. So the questions are, where do you see mindfulness intersecting with your work? Is this something that you already do or see, or is this something that you can see working in really well with something that you're doing right now? What questions do you ask yourself when you're planning a lesson, if any? Is there anything that you write that regularly comes up for you? And is there a new question or practice that you'd like to explore the next time you're planning a lesson? How important is scaffolding and reteaching in your classroom, and where have you seen their impact? Sometimes just reflecting on how important they are can help to remind us of where they might need to be included in the future. And the last thing that I want to invite you to do is, if you have something that you're currently working on, generally a lesson, a concept, anything like that that you want to consider mindfully with your groups using this practice, please bring that to your groups. Say, this is what I'm teaching my learners. I'm trying to think about this from beginner's mind, and see what ideas might come up from there. So feel free to use these, professional circles to be able to build some of that up. We are going to have just a very brief, simple sharing opportunity here to end our time together. So I would like to invite you to share how you feel comfortable. You can absolutely feel free to unmute. We're down to a smaller group now, and if there's something that you'd like to share out loud, we'd love to hear that. If you feel more comfortable sharing in the chat, that's fine as well. But I'd like to invite you to share either a word or a concept that you're planning to take with you from today into your practice for coming days. So whatever that might look like for you, if there's a particular buzzword from today that is sticking with you that you're going to try, a practice, a concept that you're going to continue thinking about or exploring, if you'd be willing to share that with us. I'll give everybody a minute. And again, feel free to unmute if you'd like to share verbally.
I have two things that I take away from this session. First, thank you very much. This is really helpful. I'm taking away the I wonder, because when I have prepared lesson plans in the past, I just saw what the goal was, but I never really thought about why the material was presented in the way it was presented. So I'm taking away the I wonder. And I'm also still on Ileana's idea of beginning the class with an affirmation. So I'm going to look for some affirmations and share that with the class, so that way they'll feel, it just to boost their confidence a lot more than just to jump right into the material.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. And yeah, what a great, going on to the main level there, right? You're meeting everybody at the door. Cool.
I can share. First of all, I want to echo the gratitude. Thank you, Amy, and also Laura. All the sessions that I've gone to that you two have run have been really excellent, and I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to learn from you. I think I'll take away kind of resilience of introducing these practices, and holding to that, even if my students might be unfamiliar with them or see them as not so useful in the moment, sticking to your guns and incorporating them into a routine in order to, open up the students to kind of accepting them as the everyday motions of the class. I think I've struggled with that in the past. So that's what I'll be taking away.
Thank you so much.
Amy,
Laura, go ahead.
I
Yes.
shared this with my group, but I really loved your practice of like asking some regular questions when you make a lesson plan. And I think I found the question of like, really like, what do I assume my learners already know? A really helpful one. So I'm gonna make it a practice to just come back to that same question when I'm making a new lesson.
Thanks, Laura. Anybody else in the chat or unmuted like to share?
For me, two things stood out to me. One was developing and offering some grounding vocabulary, particularly when it comes to digital literacy and emails and things like that. Because so often just like the language can be a barrier. So sort of building that bridge from the beginning, I think I'm going to be more intentional about that. And then the practice of building in breaks, because I've done sort of like 2 or 2.5 hour teaching times before, and I usually just use a break in the middle, but using breaks for also like if someone needs extra like assistance or like to troubleshoot different things, or just if there's a frustrating point in the lesson, sort of just giving the learners and myself some time to like take a deep breath. So being more intentional about using multiple breaks and being strategic about, just using one, even if it's not planned, and I just like feel that it could be helpful. So sort of just those two approaches as ways to enhance my lessons.
Thank you so much, Sakarja. I really appreciate all those thoughts. It's really meaningful. And I think we have time for one more if there's anybody else that would like to share. All right. Well, thank you all so much for everything that you have shared today. I want to invite you back if you are looking for more scaffolding, you want that in your life, and we're looking for that creativity. We've got more for you. Laura is going to be leading our session on Monday at noon to 1:30 on creative scaffolding in the trauma-informed classroom. Laura, is there anything we should know about that prior to Monday? A little pitch.
No, I'm excited to bring these kind of concepts into conversation with each other and think together about ways we can use creativity in our scaffolding and reteaching, and also ways that we can bring in some mindfulness around trauma and some trauma-informed teaching into that process too.